All right. Well, hi, Phil. Good to see you.
Hello, Michelle.
Always lovely to see you. We are at the Alamo so excited to have you on May 10th to come to our space and dig into your couple's work. And I wanted a chance to just introduce people to you. I know a number of people, especially in the relational psychoanalytic world, know your work. But I think, part of our desire is to kind of lower the barrier to entry of psychoanalytic ideas. And so I want to introduce people to some of your concepts and why we're having you. Can you give a brief summary of the book and what compelled you to write it?
Well, it was a lot of years in formation, but the earliest part of it was in the earliest part of my training, which was in the mid '70s, and I switched from philosophy and political science to social work because I was interested in ideas, but I was really interested in how they apply. And that's kind of central to me, is I have great fascination with all sorts of theoretical ideas, but primarily to the extent that how does this make sense from a clinical standpoint?
Mhm.
And so, long story short, was that I was in the '70s. I was in training at Menninger's, and that was all about the individual mind, the self. But at the same time, I was fascinated with family systems theory, so I had this thing between, and at the time there's a lot of competition between the sense of self
Mhm.
and system.
Mhm.
Nowadays, with the influence of relational psychoanalysis and a number of things, they seem very much intertwined.
Mhm.
But the purpose in writing this book was, how do I treat those two principal systems of ideas
Mhm.
in a way that speaks to the actualization of each partner
Mhm.
in a couple's relationship, um, and what that involves. So I could just go over that a little bit if that's what you'd like me to do.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Well, so it begins. There's, as by the way, this was a very lovely program that you put out. So it's all here. You can reread it.
Yeah.
But it's really the idea is, I thought, um, it, and I do believe for a lot of reasons that our sense of self actualizes in relationships,
Mhm.
and then that becomes critical to any long-term intimate relationship, however that is, whatever that means. And then ultimately, to feel more at home in our body and our sense and ourself, we have to arrive at certain things that feel like that fits for me. And if we're in a partnership, we have to have our partner recognize that, and both directions. And I actually say, and there's a number of people that say this as well, is that part of what's happening in a long-term relationship is we're actually seeking ways of repairing how that process of actualization got mucked up. I'm saying that's unconscious. So it's mostly like, in this relationship where I'm falling in love, I hope this will be the partner to which this, things will get repaired and get actualized. But I also anticipate or dread things won't. And sort of like the hope and dread of every relationship. And there's a number of people who all use the same kind of language and have similar ideas. So the second principle then was the idea of mutual recognition,
Mhm.
and that becomes essential. And that means that if each partner needs to be recognized in some way from the other, there's a competition
Mhm.
that gets set in motion. And that creates dominance and submission and all sorts of problems, along with uh, uh, the assertion of self, oftentimes competing with the recognition of the other. So hence all the battling that goes on. And the third idea was the idea of the relationship having a mind of its own. And it's a little bit esoteric, but it's really that the interface of our minds eventually create
Mhm.
a mind of the relationship. And I talk with couples about that quite a bit. Um, Virginia Goldner, a colleague, says, cited something that said, after 18 months of sleeping in the same bed, both partners' minds are cross-wired. So we're ending each other's sentence. We're anticipating all sorts of things that are problematic. But these are the three essential themes of what this book is about, as you've put in the brochure. And then the idea was, well, now we work with these? So takes us into the clinical domain. And that was, as it says in the brochure, a 6-step
Mhm.
outline of clinical things and considerations and ideas. Now, that oftentimes gets the idea, oh, you mean 6 steps that all go in order? No. It's 6 steps of ideas that build on each other.
Mhm.
It's not particularly to say you have to go to one and then two and then four and six and at all. But the 6 steps are divided in two halves. The first half is what I refer to as the symmetrical approach or symmetrical approaches. And these involve theories such as primarily theories like self-psychology, intersubjective systems theories, affect-attuned theories, because primarily in symmetry, the therapist needs to convey to each of the partners a profound sense of identification with them.
Mhm.
That sort of each of them says, "Oh my God, you get me. Oh my God, you get me." Now, the reason why that's so powerful is because they've come there not expecting that, and they certainly don't come there to expecting that somebody's going to be able to get each of them because they're fighting with each other. Each one thinks the other's crazy. So that it becomes a very, very powerful piece of this symmetrical approach of a powerful sense of identification. And so in the first 3 steps, I go through what that looks like, how that builds into types of transference where they can understand some things about their organized, and in particular, how they trigger each other's negative transferences.
Mhm.
And when you can put that all together, they the couple gets a much richer sense of how they're all participating in this and they don't feel quite so crazy about it. Now, the second half of the steps goes into what's called the asymmetrical. And now we're talking about steps that it's less about the identification with their sense of self, but identifying with a sense of otherness in each of them.
Mhm.
And oftentimes that otherness isn't apparent. Oftentimes it's dissociated. Oftentimes it requires enactments.
Mhm.
It has to be approached from that standpoint. In fact, step 4 is called awakening the slumbering giant. So anyway, these steps build upon each other because in this particular case, each of them has to get a sense of our being able to identify with them, their senses of self, but also to identify with their sense of what it's like to be an other to them.
Mhm.
And then that paradoxically becomes, oh, helps them see how they relate more to each other. And so there's a lot of different pieces in all of this. And I will go into in the morning, talking, breaking down these things more with lots of illustrations. And I want to make sure at various points all the way we take it right into clinical
Mhm.
examples, et cetera. And then the afternoon is largely that. So
Mhm. Lovely, lovely. Well,
thank you.
you kind of touched on this in what you were saying, but you used a lot of relational psychoanalytic concepts, and
Mhm.
I think that's the magic of what you're bringing to couples therapy. But I wanted to hear more about what do you think relational psychoanalysis adds to couples work that's missing in other frameworks, and why do clinicians need to know about this?
I think what the relational approach at large is, well, there's two ways of thinking about it. There was the original group of relational authors and theoreticians, people like Stephen Mitchell and Lou Aaron and others, and that were called the capital R big or capital R tent of relationalists. But the basic ideas of relational psychoanalysis are all can fit into a big tent in which any theory of psychoanalysis or many other theories can fit within that big tent, typically when they ascribe to certain core principles. And I would say the prominent one is that we are always in relationships to one another. And that means what's going on between us is always mutually influential. And that means that when you're doing therapy, couples therapy, or whatever it is, or any of these particular therapies with
Mhm.
the symmetrical, I talked about self-psychology, intersubjective, et cetera. Over in the asymmetrical, I talk about the interpersonal, object relations theory, etc.
Mhm.
So, but every one of them is constituted by the idea that this couple is mutually influencing each other all the time, and they are influencing us all the time, and we're influencing them all the time.
Mhm.
Now, the different theories will put different understandings and different weights upon what that influence looks like. How much of it's coming from the therapist, how much coming from what. And that's what gets fast. So for me, as you know, I call myself the ecumenicalist of psychoanalytic theory. I love all theories. So I wanted to build a model of how am I sensing what's going on and
Mhm.
speaking to that from any one of these particular theoretical perspectives.
Mhm. Mhm. And can you talk a little bit about how that differs from like EFT or some of these more semi-structured approaches like that are, I think, focusing more on communication or like pain cycles. Like something special about, I think, what you're doing is you're pulling together one, I think, utilizing countertransference and transference and
Right.
actually offering that back to the clients and
Hmm.
giving some of these concepts of relational psychoanalytic um, you're moving that into the couple dynamic and utilizing it. And so how is that useful, kind of different from these maybe other types of approaches?
Well, I could imagine that people, EFT, for example, or others that you may be alluding to, could very much identify with the sense of relational.
Hmm.
However, it's a kind of a good example of a specificity of looking in the field, focusing on emotions and within and emotions between. From
Hmm.
that standpoint, to me, that would probably be in the more symmetrical part of my model, where
Mm.
there's a powerful identification and focus on the emotionality and affect of you and what's going on in your relationship. And
Hmm.
I think that's beautiful. And I think that's wonderful. And I think that's probably one of the best ways, most of the time, to begin the therapy. And
Yeah.
it's very, very powerful. So where this would differ is in my model would be when we get over into the asymmetrical, it would be less focusing necessarily on the emotions, although that's still a feature of it. But as you said, the transference, or also the phenomenon of dissociation,
Hmm.
and a host of other things. So I'm looking then for in the structure of that relationship. Wouldn't mean I'd be excluding ideas from EFT, but I may not be focusing so much on those particular ideas, but being expansive into other ones.
Yeah. Yeah. What I hear in that is like the capacity to be curious about what is unknown to us about ourselves and know that we are unknown to ourselves and therefore I think can learn and be surprised by what how desire shows up in foreign ways you know
Yes.
you know
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that, let me put it this way, when I'm talking about it, when I'm teaching, or sometimes I'm saying that when we're doing that really good attuned work and identifying work, what we're doing all the time is we're building stories with our patients, and we're building stories and we're building stories, and we're building some rich sets of stories that say, "Oh my God, you really get me. Oh my God, you really get us." And but the thing about every story is it's edited.
hmm
And
yeah
that means we can get up to about here with beautiful work, but we're now chest deep in edits. And that's where sometime along the way something bursts through, an enactment or something like that, that is taking us, as you said, into something we didn't know before. So the whole idea of all of this is to remain as curious as possible.
hmm 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 I love that. Well, so what can we expect on May 10th? Yeah, what can you tell us about what to anticipate?
Well, first of all, in the morning, I will be digging more into this theoretical material and try to present it as playfully and invitingly as possible. I happen to love theory and ideas, but that's what I'm doing in here. When I'm in here, I'm pushing all that out.
Hmm.
Things pop up, that's way, but it's nice to have a lot of different ideas to play with. And so in the morning, we'll go through that, and then we'll talk, and we'll have Q&A, and we'll get a rich sense of that, and we'll have some clinical material. We'll decide between us how we present that. The afternoon, I would love to turn it into a whole kind of practical clinical seminar, which could involve if you have some people that want to present cases in advance, or we can do it more in vivo. But the whole then seminar or conference turns into a giant case conference, as far as I'm concerned. And I really love doing that.
Yeah.
And I also promise anybody who dares to put their neck out on the line to present anything, I will protect you and help everything make sense as much as possible. And I'll take the heat if it goes bad. Because I do believe that fundamental to our work is that we are on this teeter-totter between we have to create an atmosphere of safety, but not too safe. We have to be willing to take risks and do that as well. So I think it will just be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it always is with you, Phil. It always is. Well, thank you for giving a little bit of time to prime the pump for what's coming on May 10th, and we're just so excited to have you. You've been one of my favorite teachers at ICP, and I've learned so much from you over the years. So it's a joy to be able to share you with.
Well, it's a great honor and a joy to do it. I'm absolutely thrilled. And I read somewhere in there that Phil will be our guinea pig for this and see how this goes. So
Yeah.
our first soiree at the Alamo, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm delighted and I'm honored.
Yeah. Oh, well, see you soon, and I hope you all come.